Well, good evening. It's good to see you all this evening. Time has changed. It's not afternoon, it's evening time. It's good to be with you all. It was kind of cold for a little bit, so we can pretend like it's still cold, so we can wear our sweaters, because that's what we do in Florida. So it's evening time. We got our sweaters on. We're good to go. A good time of year. It's good to be with you all tonight. I want to begin. I want to say, I don't want to belabor this too long, but I just want to say thank you to all of you who have sent cards and reached out and talked to Megan and I. It means a lot. We're doing well. We appreciate all the prayers and thoughts and everything as we continue to try and figure out next steps and all those things. So I just want to say thank you to all that for all of you who've reached out and talked to us and offered advice and everything. It means a lot. About a month ago, I preached a sermon on Ahab. God is not mocked, right? And sermon ended pretty well. Ahab was dead. God was not mocked, kind of finalized. But there was a loose end that we didn't cover. So I think it's appropriate we go back and try to tie things up nicely, because as we finish that lesson, Ahab was dead, but Jezebel was still alive. As we talked about through that story, Jezebel was really the driving force of a lot of the evil that had existed in Israel during that time. So kind of a brief recap, I guess, of the context here before we get into 2 Kings chapter 9, is you have the divided kingdom, Israel, the northern kingdom, Judah and the southern kingdom, and they're divided. The northern kingdom of Israel was mostly evil all the way through. Not very many good people or good kings involved in the time of Israel. And the book of Kings deals primarily with those kings. And so it's a pretty depressing book. A lot of bad people, a lot of judgment, a lot of horrible things going on. And in the midst of all this is Ahab and Jezebel. And they get a huge section of the text because they are prolific in their evil. And we looked at some of that. We talk about that a lot in terms of Elijah, right? Elijah, the great prophet. We talked about in Matthew this morning, Matthew 17. Elijah was the prophet of God represented on the Mount of Transfiguration there with the law and the prophets and Jesus. He stands as like a symbol for all those things. And a big part of that is because of the way that he stood up to and prophesied against Ahab and Jezebel and during this period of time. He went to Mount Carmel, right, and stared down the priests to Baal and did all these things. And it's after that, that we get the story of Ahab and we see his death, all those sorts of things occurring. And we kind of jump ahead a little bit in the narrative here to 2 Kings chapter 9. And Ahab is long gone, but his son is the king. And chapter 9 begins with God's final response to what's going to happen to this household of Ahab, to what's going to happen to his descendants. And this is a wild ride. Those of you who aren't familiar with this part of the Bible, we got a lot of good stuff coming up in chapters 9 and 10. Don't worry, it's not the sort of thing, Sherry, that we're going to have to talk about in chapel tomorrow. No repeats here for the little kids. This is good stuff. This is adult stuff here. This is the sort of stuff that Hollywood would love if they could ever bring themselves to read the Bible. Thankfully, they don't, so we don't have to worry about them trying to butcher this story too. But here we are, 2 Kings chapter 9, and Elisha is the prophet. So you'll recall that Elijah, when he's in the cave with God, God said, Elijah, you've got 3 things to do. I want you to go, and I want you to anoint Hazael to be king of Syria. I want you to anoint Jehu to be king of Israel, and I want Elisha to be anointed as the prophet after you. But Elijah, he wasn't up for it. He was done. And so he anoints Elisha to be the prophet after him, and he's taken up to heaven and receives his reward for his hard work and dedication to the Lord. And so then Elisha goes and he anoints Hazael to be king of Syria. And now it's time for Jehu to be anointed king of Israel. But notice in chapter 9, verse 1, that Elisha the prophet, called one of the sons of the prophets to him. And he says, you take your garments, take this flask of oil in your hand, go to Ramoth Gilead, and when you arrive there, look for Jehu the son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi. Go in, have him rise among his fellows, lead him to an inner chamber, take the flask of oil, pour it on his head, and say, thus says the Lord, I anoint you king over Israel. Then open the door and flee. Do not linger. And so this is almost like people passing the buck again, right? Elijah was supposed to do this. He wasn't up for it. So now Elisha's supposed to do it. And Elisha doesn't seem willing to do it either. He picks one of the sons of the prophets, and he's like, yeah, you need to go anoint Jehu. And by the way, when you anoint him, do it separately from everybody else. And then when you're done, don't dilly-dally, don't wait to see what happens. You run away as fast as you possibly can. And you're like, that's kind of strange. But he does. He goes to Ramoth Gilead, where the commanders of the armies are, and he says, I have a word for you, O commander. And Jehu says, to which of us? To me or to everybody? And he's like, just to you. So he's like, okay. So they go in the other room, and he anoints him as he's supposed to. He anoints him with oil. And he says, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I anoint you king over the people of the Lord over Israel. And you shall strike down the house of Ahab your master, so that I may avenge on Jezebel the blood of my servants, the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of the Lord, for the whole house of Ahab shall perish. And I will cut off from Ahab every male, bond or free in Israel. And I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha the son of Ahijah. And the dog shall eat Jezebel in the territory of Jezreel, and none shall bury her. And then he opened the door, and he fled. He knew the assignment, right? Anoint him and get out of there. And we're still a little bit like, okay, so this is a little bit strange. Why do you have to run away so much? Well, when Jehu comes out from the back and the other commanders see him, they're like, what was this guy talking about? And he's like, oh, you know men and their talk. And they're like, no, we don't know men and their talk. What did he say, Jehu? Like let us know, because I think they have an inkling. And he says, thus says the Lord, I anoint you king over Israel. And these men, in haste, every man took their garment, put it under him on bare steps, and they blew the trumpet and proclaimed, Jehu is king. So it's kind of interesting, right? Anoint him and run. The men who are there, when they find out that he was anointed, they immediately in haste take their garments off and swear fealty to Jehu. Why? Well, because Jehu's the king now. He's the commander of the armies. Jehu apparently is a pretty terrifying human being. He's not the sort of guy that you want to cross blades with or stand up against. There is something about Jehu that everybody knows you do not want to be in this guy's path. He is a blunt instrument, and he will bludgeon anybody who's in front of him. And so these men, these other commanders, they know that about Jehu. So when he's anointed king, they know the assignment. Because what happens when Jehu's king? That means that the other king is no longer the king. And that means that his family is no longer in charge of Israel. And that means that they are going to be cut off. And you've got to make a choice right then and there. Whose side are you on? And everybody knows you do not want to be standing against Jehu. So they take off their clothes in haste, throw them down, and announce Jehu is king. So why are they in Ramoth Gilead? Why is the king not there? Well, in verse 14 it says, Jehu the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. And it tells us what's going on. Joram, with all Israel, had been on guard at Ramoth Gilead against Hazael, king of Syria. So remember, Hazael was the guy that God wanted anointed to be king over Syria, because he was going to also be God's instrument of justice against Israel. And so that's going to continue to happen even after this story. But they're up fighting against Syria, and Joram gets injured. And so verse 15, King Joram returned to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds that the Syrians had given him when he fought with Hazael, king of Syria. So you've got Samaria, which is the capital city of Israel. And a little bit farther north, you've got Jezreel, which is the second royal house of the kings of Israel. And then near there, you've got Ramoth Gilead, which is basically the border of Syria, where they're campaigning against Syria. So you've got this kind of, not all the way back to Samaria, but close by sort of thing. And so he was back there tending his wounds. By the way, Jezreel, the Jezreel Valley is where Naboth's vineyard would have been. So that's the secondary home. Samaria is where Ahab built his ivory palace. That's his primary residence, but he has his summer palace up in Jezreel because, any good king like Ahab has to have multiple palaces. And by the way, he has to have the best vineyard next to his palace, which is why he had to have Naboth killed. So anyway, that's where Joram is. And Jehu says, okay, if that's your decision, then nobody's leaving. Nobody's slipping out. Nobody's offering warning. You are all going with me. And nobody's going to tell Jezreel what's coming. And he gets on his chariot. He says, everybody's coming with me. and he rides towards Jezreel. Basically, they abandon the battle. We're no longer worried about Syria. We're no longer worried about their king. We're solidifying our borders, and we're going to solidify them under Jehu. So he gathers everybody behind him. Nobody warned him, and they start riding off. So they head towards Jezreel. And Ahaziah, the king of Judah, is also there, who is grandson of Ahab and Jezebel. So this is Athaliah, their daughter, would have been Joram's sister, and this is her son. So it's all convoluted, right? Basically, this is all part of Ahab's family, essentially. And so he's down there as well. And so as they start coming towards Jezreel, there's a watchman up on the tower, and he says, "There's a great host coming towards us. I see a company coming." And Joram says, "Well, send a horseman out to meet him and find out what this is, find out what's going on." And so the horseman rides out, and he approaches Jehu, and he says, "Jehu is at peace. If we defeated Syria, is at peace, are you coming back?" And Jehu says, "What do you have to do with peace? Turn around and ride behind me." Basically, none of this has anything to do with peace. Get in line. And he's like, okay. So he just joins in. And the watchman says, the messenger reached him, but he joined the company. He's not coming back. And so he's like, well, send another horseman. So another horseman rides out to him, and he says, "Is it peace?" And he says, "What do you have to do with peace? Turn around and ride behind me." And the watchman said, again, he got there, but he's not coming back. And as he's getting closer, it looks like the driving of this chariot is the furious driving of Jehu. Can't make him out, can't see him, but there's something unique about the way that Jehu drives his chariot that everybody knows that only Jehu is that furious of a driver. And so I can only imagine the dust cloud that's like rising up behind him as he's whipping his horses. And I don't know. I don't know that much about chariot riding, driving, whatever, I guess. But there's something about this that is particularly stark to where they're like, this is Jehu coming. And so Joram's like, okay, well, let's go see what this is about. So he's like, I'm going to go meet him. So he gets in his chariot and he goes out to meet him. And it says that he met him at the property of Naboth, the Jezreelite. And when Joram saw Jehu, he said, "Is it peace, Jehu? Did we win?" Essentially. And he answered, "What peace can there be so long as the whorings and the sorceries of your mother Jezebel are so many?" What a response, right? I don't have much commentary to add to that, except that Joram, when he heard this, knew that something bad was about to happen. And he says, "Run away!" And he turns and starts driving away as fast as he can. Jehu takes his bow, pulls it back at full length, shoots an arrow that is so powerful that it pierces through his back, through his heart, and pins him to the front of the chariot. And Jehu said to his aide, "Take him up, throw him on the plot of ground belonging to Naboth the Jezreelite. For remember, when you and I rode side by side behind Ahab his father, for the Lord made this pronouncement against him. As surely as I saw yesterday the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, declares the Lord, I will repay you on this ground. Now therefore take him up and throw him on the plot of ground in accordance with the word of the Lord." And when Ahaziah, the king of Judah, saw this, because he's there, he sees all this happening, he says, I'm getting out of here. So he starts to flee, and Jehu pursued him and said, "Shoot him also." And they shot him in the chariot at the ascent of Gur, which is in Ibleam, and he fled to Megiddo and died there. And his servants carried him in a chariot to Jerusalem and buried him in his tomb with his fathers in the city of David. In the 11th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, Ahaziah began to reign over Judah. So we're like, okay, so this slaughter has begun, right? King's dead. Jehu's taking the throne. But we have this loose thread, right? Jezebel is still there. So Jehu continues on to Jezreel, and Jezebel hears about all this going on. And so she does what I guess Jezebel is wont to do. And she gets her makeup out and paints her face and does her hair and sits up in the window and looks out. And as Jehu enters, she says, "Is it peace, you Zimri, murderer of your master?" Right? Kind of accusatory in her I can only imagine her trying to flutter her eyelashes. I don't know how old she is at this point, but fluttering her eyelashes, trying to, And Jehu basically just says, is there anyone up there on my side? And 4 of the eunuchs in there with her all peek their heads out. And they're like, yeah, we're on your side, Jehu. Throw her out. And they chuck her out the window. And it says, they threw her down, and some of her blood spattered on the wall and on the horses, and they trampled her. And Jehu goes in and has himself a sandwich, pours himself a nice cold beverage, and enjoys himself. He just, after all, had to ride his chariot pretty hard, so he needed some refreshments. And as he's sitting there reclining at the table, enjoying his refreshments, he says, you know what? See now to this cursed woman and bury her, for she is a king's daughter. But when they went to bury her, they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hands. And when they came back and told him, he said, this is the word of the Lord, which he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite. In the territory of Jezreel, the dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel, and the corpse of Jezebel shall be as dung on the face of the field in the territory of Jezreel, so that no one can say, this is Jezebel. And so that's the end of Jezebel. And it's brutal. And before we get too excited about how brutal this is, Jehu is not done, right? He took care of the main parties, but there's still a lot of children of Ahab that he has to deal with. And so Ahab had 70 sons in Samaria. So remember, they're up in Jezreel, which is the secondary residence. And so they have to go down to the primary residence where all the rest of the sons of Ahab are. And so Jehu writes a letter to Samaria, and he says to the rulers of the city, to the elders and the guardians of the sons of Ahab, saying, as soon as this letter comes to you, seeing your master's sons are with you, and there are with you chariots and horses, fortified cities also, and weapons, select the best and fittest of your master's sons and set him on his father's throne and fight for your master's house. He says, look, your king's dead. The queen mother's dead. You pick somebody that you think can stand up to me and put him on the throne, and you start supporting him because I'm coming, right? Like, arm yourselves. Fortify the gates. Get your swords ready because I'm coming. But again, this is Jehu we're talking about, right? They don't do any of those things. They don't say, okay, let's pick a king. Let's fortify the city. What they immediately do is capitulate, and they write back and they say, because they are exceedingly afraid, behold, the 2 kings cannot stand before him. How then can we stand? So he who is over the palace and he who is over the city, together with the elders and the guardians, sent to Jehu, saying, we are your servants, and we will do all that you tell us. We will not make anyone king. Do whatever is good in your eyes. And he says, okay. Here's the next letter he sends to them. If you're on my side, if you're ready to obey me, this is what you're going to do. You're going to take the heads of those 70 sons, and you're going to put them in baskets. You're going to send them up to meet me. And so they did. They're not standing against Jehu. And so they kill these 70 sons. They send the evidence up to Jehu, and they did it as soon as the letter comes to them, without any hesitation. And so the messenger comes and says, they have brought the heads of the king's son. And he said, lay them in 2 heaps at the entrance of the gate until morning. Then in the morning he went and he stood and said to all the people, you are innocent. It was I who conspired against my master and killed him, but who struck down all these? Know then that there shall fall to the earth nothing of the word of the Lord, which the Lord spoke concerning the house of Ahab, for the Lord has done what he said by his servant Elijah. So Jehu struck down all who remained of the house of Ahab and Jezreel, all his great men and his close friends and his priests, until he left none remaining. He executed them. He fulfilled the word of the Lord and the judgment against these horrible, wicked people. So then he goes to Samaria. And he goes down to Samaria. And when he gets down there, he has another task to do. And he assembled all the people. He gathers them all. And he said, Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu shall serve Baal much. We're going to throw the biggest feast to Baal you've ever seen. And I want every prophet and priest of Baal and every servant of Baal to come. And we're going to have this incredible feast for Baal. And if you don't come, I'll kill you, because this is going to be incredible. And you're like, wait a second, Jehu, I thought you were supposed to execute judgment against these people, and now you're going to worship Baal? But we get this note that Jehu did it with cunning in order to destroy the worshipers of Baal. So he's pretending like he's going to worship Baal so that everybody comes. And he threatens them and makes them come. And he gathers them all together. And he puts on the vestments and the garments of a priest of Baal. And he gathers them all together. And he talks about how great it's going to be to worship Baal. And he says, make sure that they're all here. We don't want to forget anybody. It's going to be great. And Jehu stationed 80 men outside and said, the man who allows any of those whom I give into your hands to escape shall forfeit his life. And he set a guard, and he sent them in, and he slaughtered them all. And that was the end of the prophets of Baal. And they brought out the pillar that was in the house of Baal, verse 26, and they burned it, and they demolished the pillar of Baal, and demolished the house of Baal, and made it a latrine to this day. Because that's what he thinks of Baal, right? And Jehu wiped out Baal from Israel, it says in verse 28. So you get this incredible story, right? And it's like one of these stories that's like, that speaks to our sense of justice, I think, right? Now, it's a little bit unfair maybe because we don't have fresh in our mind all the atrocities of Jezebel and Ahab. We talked about them a little while ago. But you think about the murdering of Naboth. You think about the killing of the prophets of the Lord. You think about the persecution of Elijah. You think about how evil and wicked these people are. And God said they were going to be judged, and this is the judgment against them. And there's something within us, I think, that likes it. That we're glad to see the judgment come. Now, it's brutal, right? And I don't know that I would have the guts to call this kind of judgment on anybody. But brutal world, right? Of brutal people meeting an end that is justified based on their actions. So Jezebel is dead, and Joram is dead, and all the sons of Ahab are dead, and the priests and the prophets of Baal are dead, and they're all slaughtered. And here's Jehu, who is this leader, the charge, the bludgeoning weapon of God to execute this judgment. And you think, man, I thought the kings of Israel were bad. Jehu seems pretty good to me, right? Verse 29. But Jehu did not turn aside from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which he made Israel to sin. That is the golden calves that were in Bethel and in Dan. And the Lord blessed him, and said, your line's going to continue because you carried out this judgment. However, it says in verse 31 that Jehu was not careful to walk in the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He did not turn from the sins of Jeroboam. And so then in those days, the Lord began to cut off parts of Israel, and Hazael defeated them throughout the territory of Israel. Starts picking off different tribes and different lands because Jehu did not fully commit his heart to God. And so this is kind of where we get to the lessons, right? Story's interesting, but so what? I guess there's a lot of things we could say, but first thing that sticks out is that Jehu wiped out Baal from Israel. But he didn't turn aside from the sins of Jeroboam. He was not careful to walk in the ways of the Lord with all his heart. Jehu's the kind of guy that you want with you in a fight, right? Everybody's terrified of him. He's a blunt instrument, right? And he executes the Lord's judgment fiercely. He's decisive. He's fearless. He cleans the house out, right? When God gave him a task, he didn't hesitate, and he executed it viciously. Military precision, frightening efficiency. Temples are torn down, Baal's destroyed, the house of Ahab's cut off. But he didn't turn aside from the sins of Jeroboam. He did one thing right. He did one thing with incredible zeal. He did one thing that the Lord wanted him to do with incredible efficiency. But his heart wasn't all the way in it. He removed the idols of other people's sin, but he didn't clean up his own heart, right? He was willing to judge others, but he wasn't willing to be introspective enough to change who he was. It was half obedience. And it's amazing, I think, if we think about this in terms of ourselves. Now, none of us are being anointed king of a nation and asked to pronounce judgment upon those people, I don't think. I'd be shocked if it happened. If it does, let me know, because that would be an incredible occurrence. But I think that this does cause us to reflect a little bit about ourselves, that we can be viciously efficient in certain aspects of our life, right? That we can find the things as Christians that matter to us, and we can cling to them wholeheartedly and make that our entire focus. And in the meantime, we can have the dark corners of our heart that are not fully dedicated to God. We can show that we are Jehu, that we are willing to stand against anything, that we will boldly pronounce our faith, or do this, or do that, or be able to stand against this particular sin or that sin, right? That we are unafraid of what the world will say about us when it comes to certain moral matters. And yet, it may only be half obedience. Because in the recesses of our heart, we have not actually committed ourselves fully to the will of God. And that's a scary kind of stern warning, isn't it? And it's this zealous nature of ours that makes it easy for us to hide our half obedience. I mean, Jehu shows us it's possible for us to be an instrument of the Lord executing his judgment, and yet not actually be fully on the Lord's side. Because God doesn't want some sort of partial reform. He's not pleased with Jehu only doing half of the work. You got to do it all. You got to give yourself completely over to him. Proverbs 3:6 says, "In all your ways acknowledge him." Not in some ways, not in a few ways, in all your ways. And in this way, it kind of mirrors our own heart a little bit, I think. Because the story can make us cheer, can make us glory over the destruction of Ahab and Jezebel, these wicked, evil people. And I'm not going to lie, I enjoy the story because I like seeing them get their comeuppance, right? I don't like Jezebel. That's probably not a surprise to any of you. And I like that the Lord executed judgment against such wicked and evil people because it stands against everything I believe in, that they could do something like that to a guy like Naboth, right? You destroy his reputation, you lie about him and bear false testimony, and then you kill him just to take his land. It's brutal. It's horrible. It's the exact opposite of any sense of truth or justice that exists in the world. But by the end of the story, I think we're made a little bit uneasy because the hero of the story is actually quite a bit like the villains he replaced, isn't he? He too is vicious against those that stand against him. He too is willing to support the calves, the golden calves. He may not be a Baal worshiper, but he's just as brutal as Ahab and Jezebel were. He's just as violent. He didn't replace them with any sort of true worship of God. And I think that teaches us something here, right? That we need something different than Jehu. Jehu doesn't fix the world. He executes judgment against evil people, but it doesn't change anything. And we know it doesn't change anything because continue to read through Kings and the wickedness that occurs and the evil people that exist. And what ends up happening is they go into judgment. And then you continue even after the Assyrian captivity or the Babylonian captivity of Judah. And the world continues the same way, right? People conquering and defeating and murdering and slaughtering. Which is why Jesus is so important, right? Because he is something different. Jesus is not Jehu. And we want Jehu. We want the victory. We want the banner. We want the battle cry. We want to march to victory, right? But Jesus isn't Jehu, because that kind of victory leads to the same sort of problems that you've replaced. And this is what we've been talking about in the Matthew class, isn't it? That Jesus is different, and he did something different. He took the shame of the cross and defeated the problems of the world by surrendering to them, which is unique. And he was resurrected on the third day, which is a unique display of power. It is so easy to be quick to celebrate God's judgment when it falls on others, to see they deserved it. And we can be so zealous to stand for truth and to stand against those who oppose God. But we need to recognize that there's a change that shifted because of Jesus. Jehu isn't a villain that we condemn, but he's not a hero that we imitate either, right? He's a tool. He's a human. He's a mirror of the things that we want and that we crave. When we look at the world and we see the injustice and we demand justice, right? And it's the very thing that people complain about God. They say, how could a loving God allow X to occur? How could he allow Y to occur? How could he allow this thing to happen if he is so gracious and loving and kind? And the answer is that to do the thing that you want him to do would make him exactly like the problems that exist. Instead of marching into battle like Jehu, he changed the way that the world is by submitting himself to the cross. And that probably should have been the final point, but I come back to this one because this is what I think of when I think of the story of Jehu. This is my last point this evening. In 2 Kings 9:7, it says, "You shall strike down the house of Ahab your master, so that I may avenge the blood of my servants." And this really goes all the way back to Elijah in the cave, where God tells Elijah to anoint Jehu, and Elijah doesn't do it. And that realization, the first time I kind of realized that Elijah doesn't do two of the three things that God asked him to do, I was like, man, that doesn't speak well of Elijah. And I don't think that's the point. I don't think the point of noting that is to speak ill of Elijah. God clearly says, you've done enough, Elijah, and he takes him directly into heaven. And he doesn't condemn Elijah for it in any way, shape, or form. Elijah was finished. He had given what he could give. The point is that God's will is not dependent upon Elijah doing what he asked him to do. It's not dependent on Elisha doing what he asked him to do. God's will is accomplished one way or another. And we saw that in the story of Ahab, right? A man drawing an arrow by chance happens to fly and happens to hit Ahab in the crease of his armor and kill him. Whether it's Jehu or somebody else, God's will is going to be accomplished. And I think we see that in the story. Jezebel thought she got away with it. Yeah, Ahab died, but she's still sitting in the palace in Jezreel. And it's so easy to think that God is slack regarding his promises, that he isn't actually going to do the things that he said he's going to do. And I think that's particularly true for us to be tempted to think that, because here we are 2,000 years or so after Jesus, and we're still waiting. And somebody who is cynically minded could say, well, surely he would have come back by now. They thought he was coming in the first century. What are you all waiting for? And the Christian believes that the Lord isn't slack concerning his promises. His will is accomplished. It may not be on our timeline or in the period that we expect it to occur, but his will was done in regards to Jezebel and the judgment against her. The story here begins long before Jehu's anointed. It goes back to Elijah. It goes back before that. God knew and saw what was going to happen, and he had a plan for dealing with it. And if Jehu hadn't been anointed by the son of the prophet that Elisha sent, he could have been anointed by somebody else. And if Jehu was unwilling to do it, God would have found somebody else. Because that's the nature of God. God keeps his word. And in this context, specifically in regards to judgment, right? He will judge those who have opposed him. And maybe that's an uncomfortable truth, to realize that judgment is inevitable for those that have rejected him. But it's also the opposite that's true, isn't it? He is faithful to his words of salvation as well. Our scripture reading was Ecclesiastes chapter 8, kind of, I guess, foreboding way to begin the lesson, those verses. But verse 11 specifically said, because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed speedily, the heart of the children of man is fully set to do evil. Think they can get away with it, right? Because it's not an immediate repercussion. Think they can get away with it because death is prolonged or cast out in front of them. Think they can get away with it because it hasn't happened yet. But that's not who God is. God is faithful to his promises. He is consistent with the things that he does and the things that he's promised to do. And even though God's justice may look slow, we see the wicked prosper, right? We see evil abound. Maybe his justice is slow, but it's patience, not forgetfulness, right? It's love and kindness and opportunity for repentance, not ignorance, not inability. And it's important to remember that when we see corruption and injustice and evil, I don't know, think of Jehu's chariot, right? Think of the judgment that will come, the inevitability of it. But along with the judgment is the salvation for those that were persecuted, the freedom for those that were oppressed by those very oppressors. And so I want to finish there because when I've studied the book of Kings as a whole, 1st and 2nd Kings, gone through Chronicles even, but particularly 1st and 2nd Kings, it's easy to moralize about the characters, right? And try and draw the applications from each individual character and story. But the big picture view that we get from 1st and 2nd Kings is a picture of God and who he is, that he is present and that he is aware. And that although he may not be acting in this particular circumstance or that one, his will is accomplished. And no will of mankind can stand against that. And I think that the way that the story of Jehu fits into this narrative demonstrates that beautifully. You may think that you've gotten away with it. It may be later than you expected. It may not be in the way that you thought it was going to occur, but God's will is accomplished. And I think that's an important lesson for us to keep with us at all times. Because God's will is to redeem and to save, and if necessary to judge, but it is accomplished. Another lesson I was kind of working on thinking about is about the land of rest, right? And the parallels we have to the people in the land of Canaan in the wilderness looking to the land of Canaan, looking for this land of rest. And the parallels to us, right? The Hebrew writer makes that point to us in Hebrews 3, 4, 5 and all that section there about how we are looking towards our land of rest and we're waiting for that moment. We may be waiting, but that doesn't mean it's not coming. We need to be assured that God is faithful to his promises. And so hopefully that's encouraging to think about that tonight. I appreciate your kind attention. And hopefully there's something in this that's been encouraging or helpful to you all tonight. If you need prayers, if you need us to encourage you in some way, if you need to be baptized, let us know if we can do anything for you this time as we stand and sing this song.